Olivia never thought she would become one of those wives, the kind who checks her husband's phone, analyzes his every move, and questions his every word. But lately, something about Mark had changed, and no matter how much he tried to push the thoughts away, they kept creeping back in. It started subtly, late nights at work, vague explanations, and sudden secrecy with his phone. At first, she dismissed it. After all, Mark had always been devoted to her, and 10 years of marriage had never given her a reason to doubt him. But then came the missed calls from unknown numbers, the moments when he would step out of the room to answer his phone, and the way he would quickly change the subject whenever she asked about his schedule. Was she imagining things? Was she being paranoid? Olivia tried to rationalize it, telling herself that Mark was simply busy, that stress could make anyone act differently. But the doubt refused to leave. Then one night, she walked into their bedroom and found Mark sitting on the edge of the bed, whispering into his phone. When he noticed her standing there, he immediately hung up and forced a smile. "Just work stuff," he said, shoving his phone into his pocket. Her stomach twisted. It was the first time he had ever hidden something so blatantly. From that moment, Olivia couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was wrong. She tried confronting him casually the next day, asking, "Who were you on the phone with last night?" Mark barely looked up from his coffee. "Just a client," he said, too quickly. Olivia knew his schedule. He never took work calls that late. That's when she started paying closer attention. Mark's work hours suddenly stretched longer, and when he came home, he seemed distant, distracted, almost guilty. He had never been a man who kept secrets, but now his entire demeanor fell off. One evening, while folding laundry, she found a restaurant receipt in his jacket pocket. It was for an expensive dinner for two, on a night he claimed to be working late. That was the breaking point. Olivia's hands shook as she stared at the receipt. Was he seeing someone else? The very thought made her chest tighten. She needed to know the truth. The next morning, she met with her best friend, Julia, at a coffee shop. "Maybe there's an explanation," Julia said, stirring her latte. "Maybe he was meeting with a client." Olivia laughed bitterly. "Then why wouldn't he tell me? Why is he sneaking around?" Julia hesitated before lowering her voice. "If you really think something's going on, hire someone." Olivia blinked. "You mean a private investigator?" The very idea made her stomach turn. She wasn't the kind of person who would spy on her husband. Or was she? Julia sighed. "Look, I'm not saying he's cheating, but if you need peace of mind, wouldn't it be better to know for sure?" Olivia thought about that all night. She hated feeling like this, trapped between doubt and denial. Every moment with Mark felt like a performance, and she couldn't live like that. She needed answers. The next day, with shaking hands, she found a local private investigator named Daniel Carter. His website was filled with testimonials from satisfied clients, wives, husbands, business partners, all seeking the truth. Olivia's heart pounded as she dialed the number. When she met Daniel in person, he was calm, professional, and discreet. "I've seen this before," he said after she explained her suspicions. "Most of the time, it's nothing, but sometimes—" He let the words hang in the air. Olivia exhaled sharply. She didn't know what she was hoping for anymore, proof of innocence or confirmation of betrayal. But one thing was certain. The next few days were about to change everything. Daniel Carter had seen hundreds of cases like this before. Spouses suspicious of their partners, convinced they were being betrayed, desperately seeking the truth. Some turned out to be baseless paranoia. A stressed-out husband working late, a wife hiding surprise birthday plans. Others, however, led to devastating revelations. Olivia's case was different, though. Something about it unsettled him. Maybe it was the way she hesitated before handing over the details, as if she wasn't sure she actually wanted to know the truth. Or maybe it was the way she kept glancing at her phone, as if half expecting a text that would change everything. Either way, he had a job to do. The first few days of surveillance were uneventful. Mark's routine was exactly what one would expect from a devoted husband and hard-working professional. He left home early, stopped at his usual coffee shop, then headed straight to his office. He took meetings, answered calls, and had lunch with colleagues. Completely normal. But Olivia had insisted that the strange behavior happened after work. So, Daniel kept watching. And then on the third day, things got interesting. At exactly 6:45 p.m., Mark left the office, but instead of heading home, he took an unfamiliar route. Daniel followed. Mark drove for nearly half an hour, finally stopping in a quiet residential neighborhood on the other side of town. A house. Not an office. Not a restaurant, a house. A single-story home with an overgrown lawn and old curtains drawn tightly shut. He parked in the driveway, got out of the car, and walked inside without hesitation. Daniel's instincts flared. This wasn't work-related. He snapped photos, noting the address and the surroundings. Olivia had been convinced Mark was having an affair, and this certainly looked suspicious. A man doesn't just drive across town to visit a random house without a good reason. But something about Mark's demeanor seemed off. He wasn't acting like a man meeting a secret lover. There was no excitement, no nervousness. Instead, he moved with a strange sense of urgency, as if he were hiding something, but not an affair. Mark stayed inside for exactly 26 minutes. When he finally emerged, he looked tense. He stood by his car for a moment, rubbing his temples, then drove off. Daniel wasn't satisfied. He waited. Half an hour later, the front door opened again. A woman stepped outside. She was older, likely in her mid-50s, wearing a plain cardigan and loose jeans. She looked around cautiously, scanning the street before pulling her sweater tightly around herself and hurrying back inside. Daniel's instinct screamed at him. This wasn't a mistress. Something else was going on. That night, Daniel met with Olivia at a quiet cafe. She was visibly nervous, twisting her wedding ring as she spoke. "Did you find anything?" Daniel hesitated. He had learned long ago that how you deliver information mattered just as much as the information itself. He couldn't just throw suspicions at her without facts. "He's not going where he says he is," Daniel admitted. 3 nights this week, he visited a private residence in a different neighborhood. He stayed for less than 30 minutes each time. Olivia froze. "Whose house?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know yet," Daniel said honestly, "but there's a woman there. Not young, mid-50s, lives alone." Olivia blinked rapidly. That wasn't what she had expected to hear. "So, you don't think he's cheating?" "I don't jump to conclusions," Daniel said, watching her reaction carefully. "But his behavior is strange. If it's not an affair, then what is it?" Olivia's mind raced. Mark had never mentioned anything about knowing someone in that neighborhood. No friends, no relatives. And yet, he was visiting this woman regularly. Secretly. It didn't make sense. Then, her phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number. "Stop digging where you don't belong." Her blood ran cold. She looked up at Daniel, her face pale. "Someone knows?" Daniel frowned, taking the phone from her and scanning the message. "Has Mark ever acted like he knows you're suspicious?" Olivia shook her head. "No, I've been careful. He doesn't suspect me." Daniel's jaw tightened. Then someone else is watching. For the first time since this started, Olivia felt a sharp spike of fear. This wasn't just about cheating anymore. This was something much bigger. The message on Olivia's phone felt like a punch to the gut. "Stop digging where you don't belong." Her fingers trembled as she held the phone. Who sent this? If Mark was the one hiding something, then why was someone else warning her to back off? Daniel took the phone from her, scanning the message carefully. "This changes things," he muttered. "It means there's more at stake here than just an affair." Olivia felt dizzy. For days, she had convinced herself that Mark was having an affair, that was something she could handle. She had played out every possible scenario in her mind. The confrontation, the accusations, the heartbreak. But this was something else entirely. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel's expression was unreadable. We find out who that woman is. The next day, Daniel worked fast. First, the address. The house belonged to a woman named Eleanor Hayes. No social media presence. No digital footprint outside of a basic address listing. No family records tied to Mark. She might as well have been a ghost. Daniel wasn't the type to make assumptions, but something about the situation felt off. Why would Mark go out of his way to visit someone who seemed to be intentionally hiding from the world? Olivia, still rattled by the text, wanted to know everything. Daniel's first move was a basic background check. What he found made his stomach tighten. Eleanor Hayes was listed as deceased. The official record showed that she had died 8 years ago, yet she was very much alive. Daniel knew he couldn't just sit back and watch anymore. He had to get closer. The next evening, he parked outside the small house, watching for any movement. An hour passed, then another. Finally, a figure appeared, Eleanor Hayes. She stepped onto the porch, looking around nervously before sitting on the top step. She pulled a cigarette from her pocket, lighting it with shaking hands. Daniel hesitated, then made his move. He got out of his car and approached the house, keeping his hands where she could see them. Ms. Hayes. Eleanor's head snapped up so fast that for a moment, Daniel thought she might run. Who are you? She demanded. My name is Daniel Carter, he said calmly. I'm a private investigator. Her eyes narrowed. I don't know you. No, Daniel admitted, but I think you know Mark Lawson. At the mention of Mark's name, Eleanor went completely still. Her cigarette trembled between her fingers before she crushed it out on the step beside her. You need to leave, she said, voice tight. Not until I get some answers, Daniel said. She turned away, staring out at the street. If Mark sent you, tell him to stop coming here. He's risking everything. Daniel's stomach tightened. Why is he coming here? She didn't answer. Daniel pressed forward. Why did someone send Olivia a warning? At that, Eleanor whipped around, eyes blazing. She got a warning. Yes, Daniel said. A text message, telling her to stop looking. For a moment, Eleanor looked genuinely afraid. She muttered something under her breath before looking Daniel dead in the eye. Then she really does need to stop. Daniel took a slow breath. Who are you? She exhaled, her shoulders sagging. I'm Mark's mother. Daniel wasn't often caught off guard. But this wasn't what he expected. Mark's mother? That didn't make any sense. Olivia had told him that Mark's parents were dead. You're supposed to be dead, Daniel said bluntly. A humorless chuckle escaped Eleanor's lips. Yeah, well, I had my reasons for disappearing. Daniel's mind raced. Why did Mark tell Olivia that you were dead? Eleanor rubbed a hand over her face. Because it was safer for everyone if they believed I was. Safer. That word set off alarms in Daniel's head. He studied Eleanor carefully. Who exactly are you hiding from? Eleanor hesitated. This conversation is over. Daniel wasn't ready to back off just yet. I think you need to tell me everything. Because if Mark's wife is getting threats, then this isn't just about you anymore. Eleanor's eyes darkened. She was never supposed to find out. Daniel exhaled. Well, she did. So now, let's fix this before someone does something we can't undo. For a long moment, Eleanor just stared at him. Then, finally, she gave in. She opened the door and motioned for Daniel to follow her inside. And just like that, the truth was finally about to come out. Daniel stepped into Eleanor Hayes' small house, immediately noticing how sparse it was. No decorations, no personal photos, just a couch, a small TV, and a table stacked with old newspapers. It was the kind of place someone lived in but never called home. Eleanor closed the door behind them, locking it with a quick, practiced motion. Daniel's instincts screamed at him. This wasn't just a woman avoiding family drama. This was someone who had been living in fear for a long time. She motioned for him to sit. He didn't. Instead, He kept his eyes on her. "Start from the beginning," he said. "Why did Mark tell his wife you were dead?" Eleanor ran a hand through her graying hair, her fingers shaking slightly. "Because," she said, "for a long time, I was supposed to be—" Daniel's jaw tightened. "What do you mean?" Eleanor hesitated, looking down at the floor. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "I was put into witness protection 15 years ago." Daniel stilled. Now, they were getting somewhere. "Why?" he asked, his voice even. Eleanor let out a bitter laugh. "Because I was a key witness in a federal case against one of the most dangerous men I've ever met." She didn't need to say more. Daniel had been in the business long enough to understand what that meant. Someone powerful, someone dangerous, someone who didn't like loose ends. "You testified against him?" Daniel pressed. Eleanor shook her head. "I never got the chance. I was supposed to, but before I could, things happened." She hesitated. "Someone close to me was killed as a warning. I was taken into protective custody the next day. New name, new life, everything erased. I was told to disappear, so I did." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "And Mark, he was just a kid when this happened, wasn't he?" Eleanor swallowed hard. "He was 16. I didn't have a choice. They told me he would be safer if he thought I was dead." Daniel exhaled slowly. "But obviously at some point, he found out the truth." Eleanor nodded. 3 years ago, he tracked me down." Daniel's mind raced. This explained everything. Mark's secretive behavior, his stress, his frequent visits to Eleanor's house. He hadn't been cheating on Olivia. He had been protecting his mother. Daniel took a deep breath, absorbing it all. So what changed? Why does he suddenly seem so paranoid now? Eleanor's face darkened. "Because," she said, "someone found out I was alive." Eleanor stood up and walked to the small table in the corner of the room. She pulled out a folder filled with clippings, notes, and old case files. "Mark warned me a few months ago that something felt off," she said, flipping through the papers. "He said he was hearing things. People asking about me. At first, I thought he was being paranoid. But then, I started noticing things, too." Daniel stepped closer. "Like what?" Eleanor pulled out a photograph. It was of her house, taken from a distance. Daniel's stomach dropped. "I found this in my mailbox last month," she said. No note, no explanation. Just this. Daniel clenched his jaw. "Someone was watching you." Eleanor nodded. And then the messages started. She reached for her phone and pulled up a series of text messages. "We know. You were supposed to stay dead. Time's running out." Daniel's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. These messages weren't threats. They were warnings. Whoever sent them wasn't just intimidating Eleanor. They were telling her that her past had finally caught up with her. Daniel ran a hand over his face. He had been so focused on proving Mark's innocence that he hadn't realized how much danger Olivia had unknowingly put herself in. "Olivia was never supposed to find out," Eleanor said. "But she hired you, and you started digging." Daniel felt his pulse quicken. "And someone noticed." Eleanor gave a small, hollow nod. "That's why she got that message," Daniel muttered. "Someone was trying to stop her before she uncovered too much." Eleanor's expression hardened. "Whoever it is, they're still watching." Daniel's instincts screamed at him. This wasn't just about uncovering a secret anymore. This was about survival. He pulled out his phone and dialed Olivia's number. She answered on the second ring. "Daniel?" Her voice was tense. "Listen to me," he said, his tone sharp. "Are you home?" "Yes, why?" Daniel closed his eyes for a second. "Lock the doors. Don't answer for anyone. And stay away from the windows." There was a pause. Then Olivia's voice came back, low and frightened. "Daniel, someone just left an envelope at my front door." Daniel felt ice creep into his veins. "What's inside?" A rustling sound. Then Olivia's voice, barely above a whisper. It's a picture of Mark and me taken this morning. Daniel's body went rigid. This wasn't just a warning anymore. This was a promise. And now, they were running out of time. Daniel gripped his phone tighter. It's a picture of Mark and me taken this morning. Olivia's voice was barely a whisper, but the fear in it was unmistakable. Daniel moved fast. Listen to me, Olivia. Do not, under any circumstances, open the door for anyone. Keep all the lights off. And tell me exactly what you see outside your house. There was a pause on the line. Then, Olivia's voice came back, shaky but controlled. The street looks normal. No strange cars. No people. Just the envelope. It was placed directly in front of the door. No knock. No doorbell. Just left there. Daniel's mind raced. Whoever was watching Olivia wasn't trying to scare her anymore. They were sending a message. And that message was clear. We see you. We know what you're doing. Stop now. Daniel exhaled sharply. I'm coming to you. Don't move. He ended the call and turned back to Eleanor, who had been listening intently. You need to pack a bag, he told her. Eleanor's expression darkened. You think they found me? They found your son and his wife. That means it's only a matter of time before they find you. She hesitated for only a second, then nodded. I'll be ready in 5 minutes. Daniel didn't waste time. He grabbed his car keys, his mind already running through the possibilities. Whoever was behind this wasn't just watching. They were waiting. And he had no intention of giving them what they wanted. When Daniel pulled up to Olivia and Mark's house, his first instinct was to scan the surroundings. Nothing seemed out of place. No unmarked cars. No suspicious figures. No signs of an ambush. But that didn't mean it was safe. He knocked once before Olivia unlocked the door. The moment she opened it, he could see the fear in her eyes. She thrust the envelope at him. Look, Daniel took it, pulling out the glossy photograph. It was a high-resolution image. No blurriness, no grain. Taken from a close distance. Mark and Olivia were leaving a coffee shop that morning, smiling, holding hands, completely unaware that they were being watched. Daniel's jaw tightened. Where's Mark? Olivia's face paled. He hasn't come home yet. He was supposed to be back an hour ago. Daniel felt something cold settle in his gut. Mark was missing, and someone was making sure Olivia knew it. Daniel reacted instantly. Call him. Right now. Olivia grabbed her phone, her fingers shaking as she dialed. The call rang. Once. Twice. Then a voice answered, but it wasn't Mark. Daniel saw Olivia's face drain of all color as a distorted, low voice came through the speaker. You should have stopped looking. Daniel snatched the phone from her hand. Who is this? The voice on the other end laughed softly. Tell Eleanor Hayes she made a mistake. Then the call cut off. Olivia let out a shaky breath. Oh my God! Daniel clenched his fists. They have Mark. Daniel didn't wait. Get in the car. Now. But... Now, Olivia! He barked, already moving. She didn't argue. They drove through the city at breakneck speed, heading straight for the one person who had all the answers. Eleanor. When they arrived at her house, she was already outside, a single duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She didn't ask questions. She didn't hesitate. She simply climbed into the car and looked at Daniel. They have my son, don't they? Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel. Yes. Eleanor let out a slow breath. Then I guess it's time to fix what I started. They drove in tense silence until they reached an abandoned parking lot on the outskirts of town. Daniel parked, turned to Eleanor, and asked a question that had been burning in his mind since the beginning. Who are they? Eleanor took a deep breath. You need to understand this isn't just about me. Then what is it about? Olivia pressed. Eleanor exhaled. 15 years ago, I was the only witness to a crime that should never have happened. Daniel listened carefully. Eleanor's voice dropped. I saw a man kill someone in cold blood. a high-ranking man, connected to dangerous people. Daniel already knew where this was going, and you were supposed to testify against him. Eleanor nodded. But before I could, someone close to me was murdered as a warning. The Fed stepped in, put me in protection. I thought I had disappeared for good. But Mark found you, Olivia whispered. Eleanor swallowed. And now, so have they. Daniel ran a hand over his face. Who is this man? The one who wants you gone. Eleanor hesitated. Then she looked up, and the weight in her expression made Daniel's stomach drop. His name is Victor Dane. The name meant nothing to Olivia. But to Daniel, it meant everything. Daniel had spent years working in this industry. He had heard names whispered in the shadows, names attached to fear and silence. And Victor Dane was one of them. How is he still walking free? Daniel asked, his voice tight. Eleanor let out a humorless laugh. The case against him collapsed when I disappeared. No witness, no testimony. He walked away clean. Daniel's mind raced. This wasn't just about Eleanor anymore. Victor Dane had let her slip through the cracks for 15 years. But the moment Olivia started digging where she shouldn't have, he came looking, which meant one thing. Mark wasn't being held hostage. Mark was bait. And the second they walked into this trap, none of them were getting out alive. Daniel exhaled sharply. We need a new plan. Olivia's voice was barely a whisper. What do we do now? Daniel looked at Eleanor. You want to fix this? He said. Then let's finish what you started. Eleanor met his gaze and nodded. It's time to take Victor Dane down for good. Daniel gripped the steering wheel, so tightly his knuckles turned white. Mark wasn't just missing. He was bait. Everything suddenly made sense. The warnings, the photo, the threats. Victor Dane had let Eleanor slip away 15 years ago, but now that Olivia had started digging, he saw it as an opportunity, a chance to finish what he started. And Mark was the perfect leverage. Eleanor sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, her expression unreadable. Olivia was in the back seat, hands clenched into fists, her breathing shallow. They didn't have time for fear. They had one goal: getting Mark back alive. And to do that, Eleanor had to do the one thing she spent 15 years avoiding. She had to come out of hiding. Daniel parked the car in an empty lot, far from prying eyes. We need a plan, he said, turning to Eleanor, because if we walk into this blindly, we're all dead. Eleanor let out a breath, nodding. They won't kill Mark. Not yet. If they wanted him dead, Olivia would have received a very different message. Olivia flinched, but she knew Eleanor was right. They want me, Eleanor continued. This is their way of drawing me out. So I give them what they want. Daniel narrowed his eyes. That's not a plan. That's a suicide mission. Eleanor shook her head. No, we control the exchange. I reach out. I make it seem like I'm ready to negotiate. Meanwhile, you find Mark's location. The moment they drop their guard, you get him out. Daniel rubbed his jaw. It's risky. Eleanor met his gaze. It's the only option we have. Daniel exhaled. He didn't like it, but she was right. Fine, he said, but we do this on my terms. Eleanor used a burner phone to send the message. I know what you want. Let Mark go, and I'll come to you. The response came in minutes. Meet at Pier 42. Midnight. Come alone. Daniel didn't like that. It was too controlled, too predictable. Dane wasn't stupid. He would be expecting a trap, which meant Daniel had to be smarter. Midnight. Eleanor stood alone at the end of Pier 42, the cold wind whipping through her jacket. Daniel and Olivia weren't far. They were watching from a hidden position, waiting for their opening. A black SUV pulled up. The back door opened. Two men stepped out, armed. And then Mark. His hands were tied, a bruise forming on his jaw. But he was alive. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. You have me. Let him go. One of the men smirked. Dane wants to see you first. Eleanor took a slow step forward. Then, a gunshot rang out. Olivia screamed. Daniel moved instantly, pulling his gun and firing back. The pier erupted into chaos. Mark twisted, kicking one of the men in the knee just as Daniel rushed forward. Eleanor dove to the ground, taking cover. In seconds, Daniel had disarmed one of the attackers. The other tried to flee, but Olivia, terrified, shaking Olivia, grabbed a wooden plank from the dock and swung. It hit the man square in the ribs. He went down hard. Mark, panting, stumbled toward Olivia, pulling her into a tight embrace. "It's over," he murmured. "It's over." Police sirens pierced the night. Daniel had already called them before they arrived at the pier. Victor Dane's men didn't stand a chance. Within minutes, they were in handcuffs. Eleanor, shaking, watched as they were loaded into police cars. She turned to Daniel. "Dane." Daniel shook his head. "Nowhere to be found. But this is enough to bring him out of hiding." Eleanor nodded slowly. Good. She was done running. Days later, Eleanor officially turned herself into authorities. She was placed back into protective custody and finally testified against Victor Dane. With her testimony in the arrest at the pier, Dane's criminal empire crumbled. Mark and Olivia, after everything, moved away. They needed a fresh start. And Daniel moved on to the next case. Because in his line of work, the truth always comes at a price.